Good morning and welcome to the Chiefs briefing for the June 18th, 2024 Democratic and Republican primary elections. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we're so excited to take you through the procedural and legal updates for this election. As before, our electoral board is composed of the Honorable Kate Hanley as our chairman, Jeffrey Shapiro as the vice chairman, and retired Ambassador Christopher Hensel as the secretary. Our general registrar and director of elections is Eric Spicer, and our deputy director and deputy general registrar is Cheryl Jones. Before we take you into the updates, I want to give Eric and Cheryl an opportunity to speak to all of you and provide you with any information updates that they have. Eric?
Thank you, Robbie. I appreciate all your hard work and the team's hard work. And good morning to all of our chief and assistant chiefs. I appreciate everything that you've done preparing for the election, everything you're going to do. So far, it looks like a slow, low turnout election. But please do what I've done for close to 30 years is in a small election like this, we get ready for the presidential election. Please get with your rovers. Look at your space. Look at anything extra you might need. Anticipate how you have to change the setup in November. I don't think the turnout's going to be anywhere near prior presidential elections, except 4 years ago, of course, it was artificially low because of the pandemic. I think we might get half of our turnout at the precincts. So you'll probably get a very robust turnout and just anything you can do to prepare for that. And get with our staff, get with the rovers. But I want to keep my remarks brief and just say thank you. And please let us know anything we can do to help you prepare.
Thank you so much, Eric. Cheryl, would you like to say something?
Yes. Thank you, Chiefs. Thank you to you new Chiefs for being brave enough to step up to do the job. And we really appreciate the returning Chiefs and Assistant Chiefs because your historical knowledge is so important for running the elections. It's a complicated job. It's not easy. And we appreciate that. Most of us here have been in the trenches. We've been election officers. We've been chiefs. We know what you're going through. And rest assured that we're here backing you up. You know, we're Robbie and Gretchen and Sean have put together terrific manuals and training programs. We're doing all we can to get you prepared. Kay and Tyrone, the group at the warehouse, have put together the carts, are giving you materials. Everything is there for you. So on election day, if you have any questions, anything comes up, be sure to call us. We're here waiting for your calls because we want the day to go as well as possible for you. So we're going to do everything possible. You and your team of election officers, you're the front line of democracy in Fairfax County. We know that you're the ones who are out there actually facing the voters every day. You're the ones who are making sure qualified voters can vote and that the operation goes smoothly, no hitches, and we have another successful election. And as Eric said, just think of this as practice for November, because of course then it's going to be, it'll be a whole different scene. It'll be much more lively than we expect it to be on Tuesday or Tuesday after next. And thanks again all. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much to Eric and Cheryl. I'm fortunate to be joined by a number of staff for this briefing. First off, my name is Ravi Udeshi. I serve as our election manager.
Hi, my name is Gretchen. I'm the election officer manager here.
I'm Sean Rogers, our training and operations manager.
Hi, I'm Jean Tenson. I work for Sean on the training and operations team.
Hi, and I'm Susan Burnell, also working on the training and operations team.
We're also going to be joined by some special guests during our briefing, including our communication divisions chief, Sarah Prowett. What are the topics that we're going to cover in today's briefing? Well, first, we're going to go over an overview of this election and some of the dual party versus single party primary procedures. We're going to take you through things you need to know and do before Election Day. We're going to walk you through the steps for opening the polls and some reminders for things to do during the day. We have some important updates and information about how to handle news media at your precincts. We're going to take you through some significant updates to how we handle non-routine voters, same-day registration, and provisionals. And of course, some final reminders for how to close the polls effectively and timely. Now, keep in mind, as with every Chiefs briefing that we do, The information we're going to cover today is also covered in your chief's notebook. We want to make sure you're well prepared and well briefed for the election, but if there's anything you're unsure about or you want more information about, definitely review your chief's notebook. All of you have already received a PDF copy of this notebook, and you'll have an opportunity to receive a physical copy before Election Day. I also want to note that the Chief's Notebook for this election over the past year has seen some significant updates. We've tried to do a really good job of identifying the information that you need and when you need it and put it in the right place in the notebook. I want to give a shout out to one of our former colleagues, Jean Fauble. She used to work in our office and she took a really big lead on overhauling our notebook and making it more effective for you. And she's back out in the field this election serving as an officer. Excuse me. And keep in mind there is a detailed table of contents at the beginning of the Chief's notebook that identifies where all the different information is in the notebook. Now, there are a number of things that are new for this election that we're going to cover throughout this briefing, but I just want to give you a brief preview of what some of them are. First, as I mentioned, we have significant changes to how we handle the same-day registration and provisional process. To help you with that, we've overhauled the voter referral worksheet, which is the document you use to assist with non-routine voters. That's what's highlighted in yellow there at the top left of this slide. We've also created a new overlay that you can put on top of a provisional envelope to see what fields a voter may not have fully completed. So we think that's going to be a useful tool, and Sean's going to talk more about that. You can see some purple one-page guides there on the top right of the slide. Those are some new guides that we're going to use and give you for your setup procedures. We've always given you those green and yellow and red guides during the day. Now we have some when you do your Monday setup as well. You'll see a poll pad prompt image there. We've updated and made the poll pad prompts, the information that shows up for non-routine voters, more informative and more direct. We have a brand new form that we're going to be using during closing procedures called the Closing Numbers Worksheet. It's going to be one form where all your election officers can record all the different numbers that they identified during their closing procedures to make it easy for you to copy to the statement of results. We've updated the labels on the thumb drives that come out of the DS200 scanners to be purple and white to match the locations that they now go. And we have an exciting update to the number 7 envelope to make it easier to copy the information from the machine certification form. There's also a number of other updates that we're going to cover throughout this briefing, small and large. It's small things like just changes to forms or instructions to make your life easier, and other larger changes, like, for example, collector officers will now be returning all provisional envelopes. But again, Sean and Gretchen and Jean and others will be covering that information during this briefing. All right, let's get into the specifics of this election and some information you need to know for Election Day. Well, first off, what kind of election are we having? Well, it depends on where your precinct is in the county. In some parts of the county, we're having a dual party primary. That's in about 2/3 of all precincts in the county. It's anywhere in the 11th congressional district and the 10th congressional district. So that's the left and central parts of the county. In the 8th congressional district, on the eastern part of the county, there's a single party primary happening there. So that means we're going to cover a number of different things in this briefing and things that are covered in your chief's notebook that may address dual party primary procedures, just like we had in March, where in most precincts you have 2 different ballots and 2 different sets of elections occurring. But in some cases, you'll just have one, and your procedures and your forms are a little bit simpler. That's all you have to know for that. 2 different kinds of elections. Now let's talk about the type of contest happening in each area of the county. Excuse me. So in the 8th congressional district, where there's only a single party primary, it's a Republican Party primary for the United States Senate. In the 10th congressional district, which is only 8 of our 265 precincts, we're having a very busy election. We have a Democratic Party primary for the US House with 12 candidates, and a Republican Party primary for US Senate and for US House. And in the 11th congressional district, which is the largest congressional district in the county, we're having a dual party primary, a Democratic primary for the US House with 2 candidates on the ballot, and a Republican Party primary for US Senate with 5 candidates on the ballot. So as you can see, the Republican primary is countywide and the US Senate contest is on all of those ballots. The Democratic primary is more localized and there's different contests depending on which congressional district your precinct is in. In terms of the resources you'll have on Election Day, every precinct will have 5 to 8 total election officers, which includes the chief and assistant chief. You'll have 3 to 5 poll pads, 2 express votes, 2 DS200 scanners, and 1 admin tablet. And you'll receive ballots for 30 to 40% of voters, both at the Democratic Party primary and the Republican Party primary. And of course, if you're having a single party primary, you'll just get Republican ballots. As a reminder, authorized representatives in a primary election must represent a candidate on the ballot, not just a political party. The local political party committees are well aware of this, so we don't anticipate any issues, but we just want to provide you a brief reminder of that. All right, so in a dual party primary, like the one that we're having in most of the county this election, and just like the one that we had in the March presidential primary, Virginia law allows voters to vote in only one party's primary. Each voter has to choose whether they want to vote in the Democratic Party primary or the Republican Party primary. And we're providing large yellow posters like this to each precinct that's having a dual party primary. So if a voter has questions about this or asks, why can't I vote in both? You can point them to the sign, which includes a code reference as well, if they like to look up in the law why this is the case. Now, in any precinct that's having a dual party primary, when you go to check in a voter on the poll pad, you're going to see buttons like this to select the ballot that the voter would like to vote, whether they like to receive a Democratic ballot, whether they like to receive a Republican ballot. Now, in single party primary precincts, this screen just doesn't appear at all. It skips this screen. So it's going to be so important to remind your check-in officers when they check in a voter in a single party primary precinct anywhere in the 8th congressional district to confirm with every voter that they do wish to vote a ballot in the Republican Party primary. So that way you don't have a voter who gets accidentally checked in, receives their ballot, says, I don't want to vote this party's primary, I want the other one. There isn't another one, and then you have to cancel that check-in. So to make it easier for yourself and for your check-in officers, remind them to always confirm with each voter which party primary they would like to vote in. So again, this is just helpful reminders that in Virginia, voters do not register by party. Any voter may vote in any party's primary. When it comes to the DS200s, voters are permitted to scan their ballot in any DS200. So don't differentiate. Don't say this DS200 scanner is for Republican ballots and this one is for Democratic ballots. And during closing procedures, when you box those ballots, they go in the same boxes. You do separate them by DS200. So if you use both DS200s, you'll have one box for the ballots from DS200 number 1, another box for the ballots from DS200 number 2. But you don't separate ballots by parties. You're not sitting there sifting through the ballots. And on many forms, election officers need to record separate totals for the Democratic and Republican ballots. It's not challenging, it's not complicated, just something to be aware. You'll write down numbers for 2 different parties. So here's an example of a form that's been updated for a dual party primary. This is the ballot receipt. So this is the form that you sign on election morning to confirm that you received the number of ballots that are allocated to your precinct. And as you can see in this precinct, which is a dual party primary precinct, they've received a number of Republican ballots, they received a number of Democratic ballots, and they would sign to acknowledge that they received both of those. And then at the bottom of the form, they're recording how many ballots are in each pack as they open them. And there's one column to record the Republican ballots and another column for the Democratic ballots. And if you're in a precinct with a single party primary, you just wouldn't have that column for the second party. So that's an example of what a form looks like for a dual party primary. And there are images of all these forms in the Chief's notebook. Now let me turn it over to my colleague Gretchen to take you through some more information.
Thanks, Robbie. So there are a number of things that we're asking our chiefs and assistant chiefs to do before Election Day. So I know we've given you more information about this in an email, but I wanted to go over some specific things to keep in mind over the next few weeks. So to get started, please be checking for constant communication from the office with important reminders and update information like this before Election Day. We've heard from some officers that sometimes emails coming from election officers at fairfaxcounty.gov, which is our email, sometimes show up in their spam folder. So please check your spam folders in case that is the case. And also we can add our email as a contact in your email inbox to make sure that they're always coming to the top of your inbox. Any calls, if you ever need to reach our office, call this number on the screen, which we provide in all of our emails as well, at 703-324-4735. I'm emailing you very regularly over the next few weeks, so please be on the lookout for those communications. In terms of the other tasks, this specifically pertains to chiefs, not for assistant chiefs. We have a number of items that we're asking you to complete before Election Day. And to make it easier for you to keep track of all of that, we have a checklist built out in the election officer portal for you. So if you go to portal.electionofficers.com, you can access your page of the election officer portal, and you can view what each of these different tasks are. We make it really easy. So we tell you what the different tasks are and then direct you straight to the page in the portal to access that information. For example, number 3, contact your roster. That'll take you to the page that gives you the list of all the different officers assigned in your precinct. We've made it interactive, so you can see that progress as it happens. So some actions will update automatically. For example, when you complete the attendance quiz for watching this briefing, a little green check mark will appear. For other actions, if you click this purple box at the top that says update status of tasks, this screen will come up here that I'm on the top right of the screen. And you can go check those off to indicate that you've completed the action. One, to make it as easy as possible for you to kind of see that visual progress of all that you've accomplished before Election Day. If you have any trouble navigating the portal, please don't hesitate to reach out. The election officer team is happy to help with any troubleshooting or any questions you might have about how to navigate the portal. Now, just to go over in particular a few pre-election tasks that we have coming up due by this upcoming Monday, the 10th. The first one is to contact your polling place. So the number to contact your polling place contacts are in the election officer portal. So make sure you reach out to them. And we recommend you do this as soon as possible. Many of you are located at schools, and Fairfax County Public Schools are about to close down for the summer. So the sooner you call, the easier it'll be to get in contact with all of your contacts. Sometime next week, things will get really busy with school wrapping up, so it might take them longer to return their call. So we recommend you do that as soon as possible. We have a number of things in the Chief's Notebook outlined for you to ask during some of this initial contact, so check the Chief's Notebook for more information. But in particular, we want to make sure that you establish with your polling place the time that you'll come in on Monday, June 17th, so that's the day before the election, to come do your polling place setup, just to get everything arranged and get the layout of the room under control for the next day. Want to agree on a time to make sure they're ready, they're there to let you in. And once you've agreed on that time, go back into the election officer portal and let us know when we should expect you going to do your polling place setup. So that's step 1, is contact your polling place and updating that information in the portal. Step 2 is contacting your election officers. So we ask that you do this no later than Monday, June 10th. Doing that now over the weekend is a great time to get in touch with your officers. Just to introduce yourself and check in with them and start giving them the information they need to be ready for Election Day. For example, if you want, so they can join you at the Monday setup, make sure that you let them know what time and where to expect them. We have an email template in the Chief's Notebook to include the essential information that you should relay to the other officers in your precinct. But we want to encourage you to not just stop at an email. If you send an email and you don't hear back after a day or two, follow up with a text, with a phone call, do everything you can to get a hold of them. If you are having trouble getting a hold of your officers after you try emailing, texting, and calling, let us know and we'll reach out to them and make sure that they respond to your communication. So step 1 was contacting your polling place. Step 2 is contacting the officers in your precinct. And this one is an optional step to get ready before Election Day, but that is to attend the Chief Open House, which we have going on this upcoming Tuesday, June 11th. And it'll be a drop-in session starting at 10 a.m. and going until 6 p.m. I personally really love the Chief Open House. It's great to put a face to the names that I've been corresponding with over the past few weeks. And it's also just a really good opportunity to get some hands-on practice with anything you might have a question about before Election Day. Our workshops are pretty structured. It's a classroom setting, but this is, you can just go over to any station and get some hands-on practice, ask any questions of our trained staff that you might have, and just do everything you can to feel comfortable and ready before Election Day. At the Chief's Open House, you can also pick up your physical copy of the Chief's Notebook if you want to start reading the paper copy ahead of time before Election Day. Otherwise, we'll give it to you in the supplies you pick up on that Monday before Election Day. So you'll get the paper copy of the Chief's Notebook either way, but if you want that head start, you should go ahead and come to the open house on Tuesday. To sign up, we have the sign up entrance times in the election officer portal, and we'll send out a link after this as well. The last big thing to do to be ready for Election Day is to go to that Monday setup I've been talking about. So this is a 2-step process. First, you come to one of the regional depots to pick up your flat kit and the poll pads, the information, all the things you need to bring to get started with the setup. We have 4 different depots around the county to make it convenient for you. And you'll have selected that ahead of time, so we'll know where to expect you. And then directly after you pick up your supplies from the depot, go straight to the polling place to do that site setup. So it's important that you don't go home in between. We want to make sure you go directly from the depot straight to the polling place setup because you have those sensitive election materials. And when you go to the polling place, you do your site setup at the time you've already prearranged with the polling place facility staff. And I know that there's been a little bit of confusion with some of the our school contacts at the Fairfax County Public Schools. So Monday, June 17th is a holiday, but we still have that paid setup window between 4:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. The schools are aware of this. They might need a reminder if, depending on who you're speaking with at the facility. So if you run into any issues, please let us know. But you do have that time window reserved between 4:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. for the polling place site setup. Another thing that we've added to make that Monday setup a little bit easier for you are some guides that you can hand out to the other officers who are helping you. So that way make it a little bit easier to delegate, to get a sense of these are the concrete things you need to get done before election day starts. This is an example of 2 of them. We have a few others as well. These are guides that you may have found elsewhere in the notebook in the past, but to make it easy for you, we've given you discrete ones just for the Monday setup to make things a little bit easier. Just a couple other things to think about when you are doing that setup is to be really mindful of how you're laying out, not just the voting room itself, but also the path to get into the voting room. We want to make sure that it is accessible for anyone who has, just so any voter is able to access it clearly and on their own. So just keep that in mind. We have more information in the accessibility chapter in the Chief's notebook with specific things to look for to maintain that clear path of travel, to make sure there's nothing obstructing the sidewalk or anything like that. As always, if you have any questions about what makes a clear path of travel or anything like that, your rover is a really good resource. They have visited all of these locations before and they would be able to give you some good tips. One more thing to keep in mind for the Monday setup, again, this is for polling places that are at schools, is that there is a Fairfax County school-age childcare program that will be in session on election day. So that's in about half of all polling places. So many of you will be affected by this. And the only thing you really need to keep in mind for the SAC program is to make sure that your path of travel does not interact with any place that the students might be located on election day. We'll have information in the election officer portal about where the SAC room will be taking place, and you just make sure that voters, when they walk in the building, they're not passing by the SAC program at any point. Your rover will have more information for you about that if you have any questions, and the polling place facility or the facility staff will be able to better direct you as well. If you have any other questions about that, feel free to reach out to us. Great. So now we've gone through a number of different things to do before Election Day, and I wanted to check in with you and make sure that was all clear. So I'm going to launch an interactive poll on your Zoom screen and we ask that you please answer and let us know what you need to do. Not all of the things before Election Day, but just the first ones that are due, which is this upcoming Monday, June 10th. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. So it should be showing up on your screen. You can vote for as many as apply. And just a little hint, there are 4 things that we're looking for.
Gretchen, I see responses fiercely flying in, and so far almost everyone's getting them all right, which is great to see.
I'm going to give you just a couple more seconds to get going on this. Awesome. So it looks like most everyone has participated and you guys are doing awesome at this. So to confirm, there are 4 things that we're asking you to complete no later than this upcoming Monday, June 10th. So the first one is contacting your polling place. The second one goes along with that is selecting the pickup and setup times for Monday, June 17th. So it requires a little bit of planning to know what time and at which locations you're going to be picking up your supplies. The third thing we're asking you to do is to contact your roster of officers in your precinct. And the last one is, you all are well on your way for this one, is completing the attendance quiz for this briefing. We will be sending out the attendance quiz as soon as this briefing finishes, so you'll be able to complete that quiz and let us know that you've done your pre-election requirements. The other two options on here, we ask that you will do as well. You just have a little bit more time. You can do that next week sometime as well. Awesome. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague Ravi to talk more about opening the polls.
Thank you, Gretchen. So opening the polls can be a stressful time, but it doesn't have to be. Let's go through some brief reminders. First, one change that we're really excited about that we made in the Chief's Notebook this year is we looked at the whole process of opening and closing and some other sections. We said, is this laid out in the most effective way possible? And does it match the way that our best chiefs handle these tasks? And what we saw is that we had some room for improvement. So we've now updated for example, the opening checklist. It used to be about 10 pages of things that you as the chief had to do. And then there were about a number of handouts, guides for others to do. Well, we've distilled that chief's opening checklist now down to 2 pages. Because what we want you to do is we want you to delegate tasks to your election officers. And that's why we give you those green 1-page guides. You hand them out to your officers, and the new updated Chief's opening checklist will help you verify as each one of those are complete. So this is in your Chief's notebook. Go and take a look at the PDF version of it and the physical one next week. But we hope this will help you effectively delegate and verify tasks and complete them sooner and more accurately. Now, as always, election officers should arrive by 5 a.m. Sometimes that doesn't happen. If officers show up between 5 and 5:30, go ahead and get them taken care of at that point. But if any officers still have not arrived as of 5:30 a.m., give us a call at 5:30. And so that way the team can start looking and identifying what reserve officers can be sent out as replacements. And then if someone shows up after 5:30 and you've already called to notify the office, give us a call again to let us know that they've arrived in case we haven't sent out a reserve officer yet, and we can deploy that reserve officer elsewhere. But again, call us at 5:30 if you have some officers who haven't shown up. Now, if you're experiencing an issue that prevents opening the polls, definitely give us a call during that opening hour between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. We want to know so we can deploy a rover, get you new equipment, whatever it might be to help resolve that issue. There's not a huge number of them, but we want to make sure that we can focus on and address those. If it's not a time-sensitive issue and it can wait a little bit, then wait until after polls have opened and give us a call maybe after about 6:30. There's also something new we're going to try out for this election that I'm going to cover with you in just a moment for another way of letting us know about a non-time sensitive issue. So as we go into during the day, there's just a few reminders and new things that we want to apprise you on. And the first one is this. We have a new issues form on the admin tablet. So there on the top left, you can see a screenshot of an admin tablet, and there's this new orange icon with a triangle and an exclamation point, as you can see in the bottom left. When you tap on that icon, it will open a new form that allows you to report any type of precinct issues occurring in your precinct. We want you to use this for issues that are not time sensitive. So for example, if you can't find your statement of results, the form for that, you could go on to the admin tablet, fill out this form and let us know, hey, I can't find this form. Next time the rover comes by, can they help me find it? Or can you just send me a new one? And this way we in the office are aware of the issue and we'll work on a response and give you a call back within an hour or otherwise resolve the issue. Now, I want to be clear, we're trying this for the first time. We hope it works well. It may not, or you may choose to not use it, and that's completely fine. If you want to keep calling us for every issue, we welcome that. We want to hear about your issues. So it's up to you. We just want to provide this as an additional option. So for example, during opening procedures, if you see an issue that's not time sensitive, you can go fill it on the admin tablet, and then we can help you resolve it as soon as we have time. And that way you don't forget about reporting it either. So again, this is a new form on your admin tablet. We encourage you to use it, but it is not required or mandatory. You're welcome to still call us. Now, the other part of issue reporting is that we don't want you to wait to report issues. Now, we're talking about just significant issues that might occur on election day. If you experience a significant issue, call us. Let us know about it in the moment on election day, and then also document it in the chief's notes. But especially if it's something that you think might happen in another precinct, maybe there's some type of disruption or there's something occurring that other precincts might benefit from knowing about, or that we as an office it would be helpful for us to know about to deal with on a countywide level, definitely let us know. This is something that's come up a few times in the last couple elections, that we hear about significant issues through your chief's notes, which is great, but we wish we knew about them on election day so we could help deal with them on election day. Now, for those of you that served in the March election, I remember a lot of hand-wringing about the process of updating your backup paper poll book. It becomes more challenging in a dual party primary. And so we went back and we looked at what is the process that we use for updating the backup paper poll book, when does it get used, and how should you most effectively accomplish this task? And we decided to make a significant change to this. So last election, we asked you to assign an election officer to update the backup paper poll book during opening procedures. For this election and going forward, we're changing that. You don't need to manually update your backup paper poll book unless you need to use it. So if a situation occurs on election day where one of your poll pads isn't working, well, first off, that's okay. That's why you have other poll pads. But if for some reason all of your poll pads are not working, or there's some other issue that requires you to move to using the backup paper poll book, we are now going to give you a pink handout with a series of instructions. This is just one page of it, with a series of instructions for how you use your backup paper poll book and how you incorporate the information that's in the close of books report and the final absentee report, which are the list of the final registered voters and the list of people who voted absentee towards the end of the early voting period. So again, let's summarize. 1, you do not need to update your backup paper poll book before election day or on election morning. But 2, we are providing you detailed instructions for how to use your backup paper poll book in the event that you need to do so. Now, you may have some situations on election day where a voter's ballot is rejected by the DS200. That's okay. Go ahead and immediately offer them a replacement ballot. Walk them over to the ballot table, help them spoil a ballot, and get them a new ballot. You want to make sure you don't have any fleeing voters, which are individuals who attempt to cast their ballot and then walk out before realizing that that ballot was not marked properly or had some other issue that prevented the scanner from reading it. So you really want to ensure that the ballot is successfully scanned before a voter leaves. So for your election officer who's positioned near the ballot scanner, they could be between the scanner and the exit door to help ensure that the voter is not immediately leaving before that ballot has been cast. If there is an issue, the DS200 will make a sound, it will beep, it will have visual cues on the screen for the voter to be aware. There's plenty of ways to know. Excuse me. So again, just help any voter who might have a mismarked ballot, so that way they have the best chance of their vote being counted. And if a ballot doesn't go in the machine, then you can always put it in the auxiliary compartment to be hand counted later, but that's a last resort. Let's talk about emergency procedures. So we have an emergency chapter of the Chief's Notebook that goes into a number of different situations. It'll talk about, it gives you instructions for how to handle situations like a power outage or a flood or a fire or different situations. Do make sure to review this section of the notebook. It's the last section of the notebook before Election Day so that you're familiar with the procedures in the event an emergency occurs. There are also some situations that aren't covered in the notebook that we're working on adding for the November election. As Eric said at the beginning of this briefing, use this election to get ready for the November presidential election. And we're doing the same thing. We're adding information and updating procedures to help you prepare for that. So one question we've received from some officers is, what do you do if, God forbid, but there was an active shooter situation in a precinct? So this is one of the situations that we're going to provide documentation for you in the next election, but we just want you to generally be aware. The correct procedure there is 3 things. It's 1, to run, 2, to hide, and 3, to fight. It might be a little bit different than what you may have thought or expected in a situation like that. Gretchen, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that in terms of our emergency procedures or any specific situations that our election officers should be ready for?
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. The main things that we want you to be aware of in an emergency is to, 1, make sure safety is the most important thing. So in any situation, if there's immediate danger, call 911, make sure everyone can get to a safe place as much as possible. And then, and only after safety is ensured, we want to make sure that you watch out for the other sensitive election materials. So for example, we have detailed instructions of what to do in an evacuation situation. Take those steps, make sure everyone has a plan for that, but only if there's time to do so. So your safety and your well-being come first, and you can review the steps in the emergency section of the notebook for more detailed instructions.
Thank you, Gretchen. Now, I don't know about all of you, one of the other situations that sometimes used to give me a little bit of stress is, what do you do if the news media shows up at your precinct? Well, I'm really glad that we now have a communication divisions chief in our office, Sarah Prowett, and she's going to take you through some of the information you need to know for news media.
Thanks, Ravi. So I'm so glad to be here today with everyone. Thanks for having me. Just wanted to reference back to the Virginia code that rules what happens with elections in the news media. So it's code subsection 24.2-604.5 that says that the officers of elections shall permit representatives to visit and film or photograph inside the polling place for a reasonable and limited period of time while the polls are open. So one main word I want to key in on there is the word shall. That means must. So the media definitely must be allowed into the polling place. However, there are some limitations, such as live interviewing must be completed outside of the prohibited area, that 40-foot entrance to the polling place, and may not ever hinder the voting process. So the media shall not film or photograph any person who specifically asks the media representative that he or she may not be filmed or photographed. And also not in a way to be filmed or photographed in a way that would disclose how any voter is voting. So any voting materials, check-in, things like of that nature. Next slide, please. So any interviews, whether it's candidates, reporters, chiefs, anyone at all, if the interview is going live, it needs to be outside of that prohibited area, so 40 feet outside. So absolutely no live interviews inside of the polling place. An election officer may require any person who's found in the majority of officers present to be in violation of the subsection to leave the polling place and the prohibited area. So here are some helpful news media guidelines. So the media representatives are only allowed inside the polling place while the polls are open, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. There's, again, no live interviews, cannot say that enough times, inside the prohibited area. And the media, of course, may not hinder the voting process or film or photograph any voter list, poll book, or information that would reveal voter information. And the media may not film or photograph any person who specifically asks, that's the key word there, specifically asks not to be filmed or photographed. And equipment should be placed as to not show the faces of those attempting to vote. So inside of the polling place, we call it B-roll. That's the background that you see on videos. So no live interviews, but definitely B-roll and photographs that is not capturing any voter-specific information. Next slide. So on election day, if the news media is visiting your polling place, if we know about it in advance, we will let you know. If they are following all of the guidelines, they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing, you do not need to give me a call, but please do capture who came and visited your polling place in your notes. If there is an issue, if somebody is attempting to go live within your polling place, if somebody is taking photos of voters after repeatedly being asked not to, that's when I want a call or a text. So you have my contact information below. There are so many precincts in Fairfax County, so if you cannot get a hold of me, please do keep calling and texting, or you can also reach out to Shweta Adyanthaya. She is our Office of Public Affairs, Public Information Official. Thank you so much for your time, and I think it's going back over to Gretchen for a question that I hopefully have answered.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. So it's time for another knowledge check, and I will launch that now. And I know Sarah was mentioning how important this is to remember, so I'm hoping that this one goes well. Wow, you guys are speedy at this.
Gretchen, I think this might be the first time we have a perfect 100% answer rate on a question. It's usually pretty close, but not quite 100. This one looks like it's about to be.
I'll give you all just a couple more seconds. Yes, it looks like you all are knocking this one out of the park. So where are media interviews permitted to take place? And the correct answer is C, outside of that 40-foot prohibited area. So yeah, thank you, Sarah, for emphasizing that information. And if you have any other questions on election day, feel free to check your chief's notebook and give us a call. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ravi to cover some non-routine situations.
Thank you, Gretchen. And just a quick reminder, if you have any questions as we're going through this briefing, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit those questions, not the chat. And then we'll make sure we answer them. All right, let's talk about non-routine situations. Well, first and foremost, anytime you have a non-routine voter situation, you should look in the what ifs, The what ifs are a document that's created by the Virginia Department of Elections, and then they're customized to match Fairfax County voting equipment and procedures. And we went through that and reviewed every page of the what ifs of this election and made sure that there were not generic references to things like paper poll books or to pieces of forms or equipment that we don't use in Fairfax County. So we hope the what ifs are now more customized and more specific to the way that we operate here in Fairfax, and that they truly answer the question that you have when you go to look at them. Now, just a brief reminder, what are the two most common non-routine situations? The first one is if you have a voter who's moved or who isn't on the poll book, that's probably going to be a same-day registration. And Gretchen and Sean are going to take you through more about that in a moment. But the other one is if the voter brings their absentee ballot with them. Well, in that case, they can surrender the ballot, you'd write absentee surrendered on it, and then that voter would be allowed to vote normally. That's the vast majority of non-routine voter situations. Now, one thing that we've done for this election is go back and look at what shows up on the poll pad for a lot of the non-routine voters that we already know about. So for example, if someone has already requested or returned an absentee ballot, if someone is marked as a federal only voter or an overseas voter, well, what does that mean? The nice part is you don't need to know ahead of election day. When you tap on that voter to check them in, or when they're referred to you from your check-in officer, the screen on the poll pad will explain it to you. It'll provide all the information you need. It'll tell you what if number to look at for more information, and or what form you have to use to help that voter to be able to vote a ballot normally on that day. So the text of all those prompts is now in your chief's notebook in the non-routine what ifs chapter. So you're welcome to switch that, to move to that chapter when you receive your notebook and look through and read through all these different prompts that govern these different situations, and then you'll know what will show up for those voters. Now, one common question we get about on election day is, I've checked someone in and either I forgot to check a flag or I need to cancel the check-in because I checked them in for the wrong party's primary. How do I do this? Well, we've added a new chapter to the Chief's notebook called problem solving. When you have a problem, check the problem solving chapter. For example, here's an image of how to cancel a voter's check-in on the poll pad. And again, the most common situation for this is going to be if you check in a voter for the wrong party's primary. That's not just an edit check-in. You have to cancel the check-in and then check them in for the correct party's primary. But instructions for this and other common situations are now in the problem-solving chapter of the notebook. As I mentioned at the beginning of the briefing, the biggest changes for this election are our procedures to help you process same-day registrations in provisional voter situations. And I want to turn it over to Gretchen to take you through some of that.
Great. Thanks, Ravi. So just to give a quick reminder about what to expect with a provisional situation. So provisional is just kind of a fancy word to talk about non-routine voters whose ballots are set aside to be adjudicated later after Election Day. So the voter fills out the same ballot as anyone else, but they're sealed in an envelope to be adjudicated and counted if the Electoral Board decides to count the ballot. The most common provisional situation to be aware of by far are same-day registrations. So that's why we have a same-day registration specialist in your precinct, and I'll get more into that in just a moment. But just briefly to give a little bit more information about same-day registrations, the main thing to know is that any person who is qualified to register to vote but has not done so already can do a same-day registration in the precinct where they currently live. So generally this happens for someone who has never registered before, so a first-time voter, or someone who recently moved into your precinct but has not updated their registration. So there's just a couple of things you check to confirm they live in your precinct and they are eligible, and then you go ahead and do that same-day registration. But like I said, same-day registration is just one component of the overall provisional process. And that means that there are the one provisional envelope for any kind of provisional situation, but which side of the envelope depends on whether or not it's a same-day registration. So just one big thing to know for this is to make sure you complete the correct side of the provisional envelope. We've made it easier this time. We've got a big red SDR stamp on the SDR side. So if you're completing a same-day registration, just make sure to look for that stamp to complete the correct side. I can't emphasize enough how important this is. If you accidentally complete the wrong side of the envelope, the voter's ballot may not be able to be counted. Just a couple other things to know for provisional ballots, specifically in primary elections, is that we ask if you write the D or the R, depending on what kind of primary it is, on the top right corner of the provisional envelope. And like you can see on the here, we have the precinct number, and then just write D or R next to the next to that, just so we know what kind of ballot is inside. We ask that you do this not just in the dual party primaries, where there will be both Democratic and Republican ballots, but even for those of you in the 8th district, we still ask that you write R at the top of every envelope, just so we know that that is a Republican ballot. That's important for us on the processing end of things. That makes everything go a lot more smoothly during the provisional adjudication. Other things to know for provisionals in a primary specifically, is you will always have these number 1A envelopes, which is where you return, it's the big envelope where you return all of the smaller provisional envelopes, but you'll have up to 4 of them in a primary election. So in the 10th and the 11th congressional districts, you will have 4 of these number 1A envelopes. So we have 2 different kinds based on if it's a same-day registration or a non-SDR. So all of the same-day registrations would go in the envelopes here that have again, the big red SDR stamp on them. And all of the other provisional situations where you fill out that backside of the envelope would go in one of these number 1A envelopes instead. And then we've got 2 other ways to divide it up to whether it's a Republican or a Democratic ballot. So again, it's not too hard to keep track of. Just know that you have 4 number 1A envelopes if you're in the 10th or the 11th congressional district. If you're in the 8th congressional district, you'll just have the 2. So you'll have one of these 2. You'll have the SDR for Republican ballots and the non-SDR for Republican ballots. And we'll provide more information in the instructions for the SDR specialist of where to put these envelopes. And now I'm going to get into something that we are excited to share to simplify the process for all officers involved in the same-day registration process. Before, we didn't give as clear guidance as we could have about just the way that the division of roles would go between the chief and the assistant chief and the SDR specialist. So all of these officers are trained in how to conduct same-day registrations, but we got some feedback from officers saying it would be helpful to know specifically what the chief was asked to do rather than what the SDR specialist was asked to do. And so we had a few weeks ago an SDR briefing specifically for SDR specialists, and I know a number of you watched as well, which we greatly appreciate. And so now we're providing the similar information to the chiefs now. So to summarize, the chief and the assistant chief are the decision makers in the same-day registration and all provisional processes. So they're the ones evaluating moving conditions. They're checking over the different instructions that we provided them to determine whether a voter is eligible to do a same-day registration or other provisional ballot in their precinct. And then at the point that they've made that decision, they'll then turn over the process to the SDR specialist, who will help them complete the provisional envelope. The SDR specialist is essentially performing the administrative role of making sure the envelope is completed, checking to make sure every single field is filled out, all of that, after the chief has done some of the decision-making process. The one thing I'll add to the SDR specialist role is that they will have the admin tablet because they're going to enter the information in the electronic provisional ballot log at the end of the process. And that means they will also use the My Neighborhood tool on the admin tablet to assist the chief if they need it. So chiefs and assistant chiefs, you don't need to worry about using My Neighborhood yourself. You can just go over to the SDR specialist and ask them for assistance with that part of the process. And because you'll be working so closely together, we've revised the way we instruct officers to set up the voting room layout, which is included in all of your pre-election materials as well. But you can see we've got the SDR specialist who will have their own designated table right next to the chief's table. So if you're dealing with a voter and you're trying to just determine what precinct they live in, you can just lean over to the SDR specialist and ask them to look up in My Neighborhood for you. And then when the voter goes to complete the provisional envelope, they'll move over from sitting at the chief's table to work with you, and then they'll finish the process over at the next table with the SDR specialist. You just highlight the chief and the SDR specialist sitting side by side for election day. And to help you with this process, we've decided to make it really easy and just have kind of the one sheet of paper with all the information you need to know for these common provisional situations with a significantly updated voter referral worksheet. So you may have seen something similar to this worksheet in the past, just with a lot less information that we know that we've got a feedback from many of our chiefs that it didn't have all the information they needed, so they didn't end up using the voter referral worksheet very often. So we took that feedback to heart and spent a lot of time updating this voter referral worksheet to really give you step-by-step instructions and guidance and space to work through situations for the most common non-routine situations that would likely result in a provisional ballot. So in just a moment, my colleague Sean is going to walk you through all the different scenarios step by step so you know what to expect. But I just wanted to give you a quick overview of this worksheet and let you know that we've simplified procedures to make it easier both for you and for the voters to know that the process is being done clearly and transparently. This is going to be required for every non-routine situation likely to result in a provisional ballot. So we know that it seems like a lot, but you'll see once we get through it that it'll go pretty quickly, just a few minutes to complete that part of the process. And that way we'll have a record of the steps taken for every single provisional voter. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Sean to go over in a little bit more detail what the worksheet entails.
Thanks, Gretchen. Excuse me. She gave a very good overview of the goal with the voter referral worksheet here. And as she mentioned, this replaces the prior voter referral worksheet that we had that had essentially a place to write information about the voter and just to check off what their situation was. And so there were many more things captured on that voter referral worksheet. And we found that a lot of them just weren't likely to occur, didn't need to be on a referral worksheet, and wasn't really a worksheet. So we'll walk through the steps of the worksheet here. We're gonna dive down and look at all the boxes on it so you can get familiar with it before you have to use it. And we'll talk about which steps different people in the precinct are following. So this referral worksheet essentially follows the voter in their journey through the precinct from the check-in station to the chief or assistant chief, and then over to the SDR specialist if they end up voting a provisional. Now, they may not. We're going to talk about the situations here on the worksheet. You can see there's a good amount of text, but you're not looking at all 4 boxes. And as I mentioned, this truly is a worksheet now that will help you walk through and work through how best to help out each individual voter. And now you're always welcome and encouraged to refer to your manual and the what ifs, but the text for what steps to take is also on this worksheet for these sections. So let's talk about first who's completing the worksheet and then how the worksheet works. So the top section is completed by the check-in officer. And so when the voter is at the check-in table and one of these 5 situations or 4 situations applies, and we'll see what those are in just a second, but when one of these situations applies where the voter is going to be referred to you, the check-in officer checks that off and just needs to write the voter's name. Once they're referred over to you, the chief or assistant chief completes section B, which is 5 sections, but really for any voter, you're just completing 1 section for the reason that they're referred to. And we'll walk through what sections A, B, C, D, and E are, and these are just step-by-steps for what that situation is. And this is just space to work through that. And then finally, as we're going through the precinct, if the voter ends up being a provisional voter, let's say they're a same-day registration or voting provisionally for some other reason, the worksheet goes with them to the SDR specialist at their table. And this has a checklist for them to complete for each voter. Similar to the checklist that we previously provided, there's now just one it's got a little bit less text, and it actually has a box to check off for each and every voter, so you can keep track of that. I'll mention a couple of updates to that checking process for the SDR specialist here, though, before we dive into the form. As Ravi talked about earlier, we have a new tool for the SDR specialist to use. You can see here an example filled out provisional envelope, the SDR side of one. There's a lot of text on this envelope. There's a lot of visual noise and non-material information for their application here. So things like if they're currently registered in another state, they're interested in being an election officer, great information to have, but it's not the required information. Those wouldn't be material omissions. So we have a piece of plastic. It's a polystyrene material that can be placed over top of an SDR envelope to hide away all that noise and just focus on what are the important pieces of information that you're checking for, or that the SDR specialist is checking for when they're reviewing a provisional envelope. So we can see that if we put that on top of this envelope, you can see we can just look at the sections that the voter was supposed to complete and the election officer is supposed to complete. And so with this one, it's a little bit easier to see, hey, there are some issues. This voter didn't fill out their whole social security number. We didn't write the party primary on the top. We didn't answer box number 3, the question for felony or mental incapacity. So this is just an extra checking tool that we ask that the SDR specialist is using for SDR envelopes to help them give a quick once over to the provisional ballot envelope. They should still review it, but this helps them focus on what are the important material omissions that we're looking out for. Speaking of material omissions, our most common one is that box number 3. You can see there's no answer here. We have a highlight over the no checkbox. Thank you, Gretchen. And on the next slide, you can see here that is one of our most common mistakes, is that we see provisional envelopes come back and the voter has either not answered this question, or they've answered box 2, but the second part of it, the second set of checkboxes, but not box 1, or they've checked yes, but they did not indicate yes or no on the second checkbox. So the overlay, one thing I will mention is the overlay highlights the first checkbox just because that's the most common answer. But if you see it empty, or if the SDR specialist sees it empty, they would then take it back off and take another look. And if needed, prompt the voter to provide more information. So this is just a reminder. That is one of the things that we see the most common, and that's one of the things that we're trying to address by having a tool that the SDR specialist can use to help review these envelopes. Another important new part of the process, or an additional part of the process, and this is part of that SDR checklist on the back of the voter referral worksheet, is that we're asking that another election officer, can be anybody, the chief, the assistant chief, or any other election officer in the precinct, take a quick look at the provisional envelope, whether it's an SDR envelope or the non-SDR side of the provisional envelope, and just double check that the fields are completed. This can be a quick process, but it's another checkbox or safeguard to make sure that the voter we're catching in the precinct the voter. If there's any issue, we make sure that gets corrected right then and there, because once it comes back to our office, the voter doesn't have a chance to come back and fill in that information. So having mentioned those couple of caveats or the changes to the process or updates to the process, we'll now jump into each section of the voter referral worksheet like I was talking about. And what we did is we essentially looked at what are the issues or errors that we're seeing coming back from our precincts? What are our very successful or most successful chiefs currently doing, let's say in their chief's notes, in their notes on any given voters, and documents that they create for themselves and bring to the precinct. And we try to incorporate that into a one sheet of paper that can go with each voter. So as I mentioned, you start off at the check-in table where the check-in officer will do one of 4 or 5 reasons, and then it goes to the chief or assistant chief to work through the voter's situation and make a decision. So if we zoom in on the check-in officers section, we'll finally talk about what these situations are. And they're really just the ones that are most common or most likely to end up being a provisional. And as I said, they might not be, but I'm going to go through them one by one here. A voter has an absentee status on the poll pad. Hey, we see that they have been issued an absentee ballot or something to that effect. The voters move from the address on the poll pad. Hey, that's a voter has moved. That's pretty common. They may have another status. They may be marked as inactive or confirmation mailing. That aside, you would use box B if their address doesn't match what they've moved essentially from the address on that poll pad. Section C is even easier. They're not on the poll pad at all. Maybe they're not registered to vote. That'll probably be an SDR, but we're going to use the worksheet to make sure they're in the right place. And section D, they're already checked in or has an SDR provisional status. We'll talk about that in just a second, but essentially that's the voter is marked as already voting. So you may be able to pick up on a lot of these. Yeah, these are reasons that voters will end up voting provisionally. So knowing that the check-in officer just has to put the voter's name here, their last name, first name, and middle name, and also what precinct you're in, and then just check off one of those 5, and then it goes to you, the chief or assistant chief. And we'll walk through each of those sections. We'll take a brief minute to decode the text that's on here, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of text here, but it's a pretty straightforward process. If a voter has an absentee status on the poll pad, that can be a couple of different things. And so there are 3 kind of categories here. And again, as Ravi mentioned, these are delineated in your chief's notebook. We have a section that explains what the poll pad's going to say if you see any of these statuses, but one of them can be unmarked. That would be that the voter has, or we have, the Office of Elections has the voter's unmarked ballot. They've returned it. Perhaps it never made it to them. That is what if number 20 A and B, if you might know. And again, you're always encouraged to check the what ifs if you don't know. But in that case, the voter is, and this will also say it on the poll pad prompt as well, the voter is eligible to vote routinely. And so all you have to do is check that box and proceed. And that voter referral worksheet is done for that voter. The second category, or A, would be, there's several things there, but they're marked, pre-processed, on machine, or FWAB. Essentially, that means they've returned a ballot, right? So they've already voted. And so in that case, we know that there's a provisional reason for voters already voted. And so we just check that they can vote a provisional ballot, which is reason code number 5. And whenever we see C back here, that's referring to the SDR specialist checklist, which we'll talk about in just a second. And finally, this perhaps the most common one, voters marked as being issued. And then there are 2 questions there. They've been issued a ballot. Do they either have it or they don't have it? If they have it, they can surrender it and vote in your precinct. And so that would be a non-provisional situation, and there are instructions there on the checklist, but all you have to do is check off that selection and follow those steps. If they don't have the ballot with them, as you may know, that would be a provisional vote, and you would check that and refer them to the SDR specialist to start the provisional process. So that helps walk through any given absentee status for a voter, perhaps that most common one being issued. You can see it's a list of instructions and steps and things for you to check, and then a place for you to mark what choice you ultimately ended up making to help that voter. So having box number A out of the way, we'll talk about box number B. Again, there are 4 situations that this voter referral worksheet is aiming to help address. The voter has moved, right? So the check-in officer has seen one address for them on the poll pad, and the voter has indicated that they've moved to another address. And so what this is a space to essentially record those addresses and then ask the SDR specialist to look them up in my neighborhood so we can check what precincts they are, what congressional districts they are, and then evaluate the moving conditions. You can see it says there in that checkbox in your what ifs in your manual to see what options the voter has, because they may be able to vote routinely there in your precinct if they moved within your precinct or it was a recent move. They may be eligible to vote in another precinct, or they may be eligible to vote an SDR in your precinct. These are the same kinds of problem solving that you're already doing or already were doing in prior elections. This is just a place to write down. We've seen people will make little charts in their Chief's notebook, or I'm sorry, Chief's notebook and Chief's notes to record addresses for provisional voters. As I mentioned, we've seen Chiefs bring in their own sheets of paper to record this information. So this is just a place to write that down and help you work through it and then arrive to the best option for that voter. And then going on to section C, the one I said that's perhaps a little bit easier, we only have one spot to write down. Oh, I'm sorry. I should mention the moving conditions that I'm talking about in the notebook. If you're need a refresher or you're not familiar with them, there are what ifs number 5 through 8 in your Chief's notebook. And in your Chief's notebook, you also have a couple of tools to help you work through, once you have the information of their address, their precinct, what their options are. So we have a chart here to help you work through that. And then we also have, this is a grid, and then we also have a flow chart if you find this an easier way to work through what is this voter's option. So these would all be for situations where a voter has moved. We often call them the moving conditions, when and where and how far they moved. And the voter referral worksheet gives you a place to kind of work through that for that voter. Now moving on to section C, for a voter who's just not on the poll book. The first thing you do is perform an advanced search on your poll book. Make sure that on your poll pad, make sure that the check-in officer maybe didn't find them. So we'll perform an advanced search, double check that they don't have a name that's hard to look up or something to that effect. And if the voter insists that they are registered to vote and they don't agree, oh yeah, I didn't register. If they do insist that they are registered to vote, give our office a call, because our office has more information than you have in the precinct. They have access to the whole state of Virginia. They can check what that voter situation is and help them figure out, are they registered in Fairfax County? Help you figure out, are they registered in Fairfax County? And our voter services staff are here to help. They're by the phone waiting, ready to help out with any voter situation. But let's say they are not on the poll book or the poll pad at all, and we've confirmed that. We just ask the SDR specialist to use My Neighborhood to find out which precinct they're eligible in. And if that's your precinct, great. You check that box, and we proceed with the SDR process on the backside. And if they're eligible in another precinct, we check that box or that circle, and we give that voter that information. So you can see we're just writing down the voter's address and then the decision that comes out of that. And section D of the voter referral worksheet, and again, you're only really completing one of these 4 sections for whatever the voter's referral reason was. But that being voter C, section C would be our common SDR. Voter, section D would be, I'll explain the text that says voter is already checked in or has an SDR provisional status. So the voter's already checked in. That makes sense. They came in during early voting. They came in earlier today. Let's say maybe they have the same name as a family member and they live at the same address. Maybe a mistake was made at the check-in table. For whatever reason, they're already marked as being checked in and having voted. So we can't check them in again normally. But if you see a status that says SDR provisional, that's essentially the same thing. They've come in during the period of early voting and done an SDR. So they've already voted, same situation. In these circumstances, this would be when we offer the voter a provisional ballot, a non-SDR, reason code number 5. And so again, we double check that we found the right voter. And then we record, hey, we're going to proceed with a provisional ballot. And like I said, wherever it says see the back, that's when we turn it on over to the SDR specialist to start their checklist. Before we get to that, though, let's talk about section E, other. You can see there's no checkboxes here except for whether or not you needed to give our office a call. This is because if there's any of those situations, anything not captured by those 4 really common or likely to be provisional situations, hey, give our office a call. If you don't know how to proceed, if you ever don't know how to proceed, call our office. Our number is in your chief's notebook, and you can describe the situation. It's essentially a free space to describe the situation for what the voter had, what resolution you ended up arriving at, and then when you made that call to our office and who you spoke with. If you want, you can use this section to record information for things that aren't captured in those other 4. As I mentioned earlier, or as you may have noticed earlier, inactive and confirmation mailing aren't specifically mentioned in section B, box B, because really we're talking about whether or not they've moved. But if there's another poll pad prompt that you see that pops up and you want to record that information, you have other to do that with as needed. But knowing that those are the 5 referral reasons, or 4 and other, as I mentioned, we have our office standing by on election day. Their general support, tech support, voter support. You can see their numbers on the inside cover of your Chief's notebook. And there they are right there. That's, again, that's the exact same text that you'll see for giving you the numbers to call for voter support or for any issues regarding equipment. In this case, I'm talking mostly about voter support, but as I'm kind of emphasizing here, feel free to give us a call if you need to. Moving on to the final part of the worksheet. And again, as I mentioned, this kind of follows through the voter. We dove into 5 different situations there, but any given voter is really just going to be completing one, and you're going to be completing kind of recording the decision that you've made to help out that voter. On the backside, once we hand it on over to the SDR specialist to start having them go through the provisional process and fill out the envelope and everything that needs to be done there, all we need to do is mark what they're doing, either a same-day registration or a non-same-day registration, and which reason code that is, because there are several other reasons that they may be voting provisionally. And then once you've marked that off for the SDR specialist, hand it to them, and they have this whole checklist to go through with the voter. I won't go through each and every one of these because the SDR specialist is trained to walk through all these steps, but essentially this is just making sure these are things that we would already do for any given provisional voter. Make sure that their envelope is filled out completely, that they've been given their notice, that it enters the provisional ballot log, and notably that we check for missing information, again, using that SDR overlay tool for the SDR side, and have another election officer double check before we seal and have the voter depart the precinct. So we talked about each and every section. I hope you can see that it is a lot of text as we go through, but it truly is a worksheet at this point. It can help you arrive at the decision that you want to make to help that voter. And then it also gives the SDR specialist a way to follow along and make sure that they are helping out with the process. And again, this for each voter, this helps you kind of stay on track. And so finally, looking at the whole document as a whole again, here it is, zoom back out. You can see there are those 3 sections. The question for what to do with it when you're done, that just gets returned in envelope number 8. You can see it says there on the front as well, as a reminder, to return it in envelope number 8. That's where a lot of other documents go, kind of loose. It does not go, one thing I do want to mention, it does not go with the provisional ballot in the provisional envelope itself. The only thing that should go in the provisional envelope is that ballot, because we can't, we will be unable to open that sealed ballot. So again, it doesn't have to be paper clipped or attached to the voter's provisional vote. Just gets returned in envelope number 8 with all those other materials. And so we're hoping that this worksheet can kind of create a replicable process for any chief, every chief and assistant chief, to help you kind of walk through these voter situations and help make sure that we are giving them the best service we can to the best of our ability. And so I think I have Gretchen here for a quick knowledge check about what we just talked about. Gretchen?
Yes, thanks, Sean. So one more knowledge check for you all to hopefully summarize just a little bit more of the voter referral worksheet. So I'm going to go ahead and relaunch this. But this is a true or false question. The statement is 2 officers must review every provisional envelope to ensure it is fully completed. Again, you guys are quickly knocking this one out of the park.
Same thing as the last one. A lot of people are getting the right answer. Another maybe 100% completion one.
Give just a few more seconds for the last people to answer. And it looks like you all were correct. The answer is true. So we want 2 officers reviewing every provisional envelope to ensure it is fully completed. Sean went over that section of the SDR checklist saying who performed this double checks to make sure that is filled out. Again, that does not necessarily have to be the SDR specialist and the chief. The SDR specialist is doing that first pass, but if the chief or the assistant chief is busy, another officer can be the second person performing that double check.
Thanks, Gretchen. And I think after having gone through that voter referral worksheet, I know that took a couple of minutes, but that is a new process. So we want to make sure that it's explained in detail before you see it and before you start working with it. With that out of the way, I'd like to turn on over to Jean here to start talking about some tips for closing the polls. Jean?
Thanks, Sean. Well, it is 7 o'clock. The last voter has left the room, and now it's time to take a breath, get something to drink, and get yourselves collected. Everybody may be a bit tired from the day, and this is when you want to start paying very close attention to all of the checklists and instructions that we give you to help you get through the closing process. I'm going to share some tips that will help you get through this so you can get home earlier versus later. The first thing you should do is have your red closing guides ready to hand out to the officers. A best practice for this is hand them out maybe by 5 o'clock in the evening so that people have a chance to look them over and know what they're going to be doing once the last voter leaves the room after 7 o'clock. It's better to do that than have people see this for the first time at 7. Give them a chance to read through it and see what's going to happen. We reworked the closing section of the Chief's Notebook to distill 12 pages worth of do this, do that into 5 pages. This is now your Chief's closing checklist, and it is a guide to handing everything out and then verifying that each team has done the tasks that you've assigned them to do. So your big takeaways here are delegate and verify. As people do the closing tasks, there are a number of, no pun intended, numbers that they're going to be collecting for you. Counts from the DS200, number of surrendered absentee ballots, things like that. And rather than have sticky notes floating around or some little form that you might have come up with for yourself in the past, we have a new form, and everybody's going to write down all this stuff on here so that you have it in one place when it's time to do the statement of results. So if there is something missing from this form, hand it back to the team that did that task and ask them to go get it. You may find that a voter was in a hurry and they put their ballot in the scanner, headed out the door, and the ballot got rejected. Beep, beep, beep. The DS200 officer should cast that ballot for the voter. But if it won't scan, even if you turn it around and put it upside down or whatever, put it in the aux compartment. And at the end of the night, you're going to hand count that ballot. It's rare. I did 15 elections as a chief and I only had one. We now are giving you a copy of the Virginia Department of Elections Guide to Hand Counting Ballots, which has all sorts of great examples on how to tell if what's good vote, or excuse me, bad choice of words, what is a vote that you can count and one where you're not certain of the voter's intent. This is in the side pocket of your black kit. If you never have a hand counted ballot, you'll never take this out. Just leave it in the kit. And if you have any doubt whatsoever about doing something that's hand counted, give us a call. Closing the DS200s is a step that you don't want to hurry through, and you also don't want to try to be the speed demon who tries to close both of them at the same time. And there's a good reason for that. If you're trying to close them at the same time and something goes wrong, the other one is not in a state that you can then rescan the ballots on the other scanner. So start with the scanner that has the highest public count, because that's the one that'll take the longest to close. Close that one, and once that is completely dark, then you can move on to the second one. And speaking of completely dark, it's super important to wait until that screen is black and that scanner is completely shut down, completely powered off. Then you can remove the flash drives. Every election, it seems there's one precinct that somebody's just in too big of a hurry. They pull those drives out. It's just like crashing the hard drive on your computer. The drive's corrupted. Now all the ballots have to be rescanned on the other scanner. Don't do that. All right, now to help get these flash drives where they go, we relabeled them. White ones go in the white number 7 envelope. Purple ones go in the purple pouch. So just match your colors and you'll be good. You should have 2 of each of them. If you're in a co-located precinct, there will be 2 purple pouches, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Collector officers are the folks who get to leave a little earlier than the rest of us. They're going to be bringing back a number of items that we're anxious to get our hands on. Number 1 being the purple pouch with 2 purple labeled flash drives. The triplock security bag with the chain of custody form inside that has the Dropbox ballots. Co-located precincts, depending on the configuration, may be sharing a box, in which case they can use one bag. And new for this selection is the collector officers will be returning the green number 1A envelopes. There will be 4 of them in precincts with dual party primaries, 2 in the 8th Congressional District where we have just 1 primary. Co-located precincts will have double all of these items. So 2 pouches, 8 envelopes, or if you're in the 8th, 2 pouches and 4 envelopes. So slow down, check to make sure everybody has everything before they head out the door. And another thing that we often see is people not reading those directions on the collector officer guide, and they're sealing the bag before they tear off the strip, the receipt strip on the top. Tear that off first, then seal the bag. We're now improving how we're keeping track of a number of items. Among them are the boxes of voted ballots and blank ballots. And we're using something called RFID to help us do that. It's an enhanced barcoding. So it's very important that you put the ballots in the right boxes. Voted ballots, the number 3 envelope, excuse me, one number 3 box, those are going to go in white cardboard boxes wrapped up like a present with red tamper tape. And your blank ballots, number 6, that's going to come back in the good old brown boxes, also wrapped up like a present on the holidays. Any unused ballots or unused boxes, pardon me, just leave those flat and return them in the cage. All right, you're going to need 2 things to do your statement of results. The first is that closing numbers worksheet, that new worksheet we talked about a couple minutes ago. The other is the ballot status accounting report that comes from the closing tapes from each of the scanners. And we've highlighted on this slide and also in the notebook, we're not expecting you to see this tiny type here. We've highlighted exactly where to find the information on the tape and where it goes on the SOR. So again, we're continuing to improve and make this as straightforward, as step-by-step as it can be without you having to try to guess, where do I find something? The statement of results, as I mentioned, you're going to be pulling the closing numbers worksheet and your ballot status accounting reports. Because this is a dual party primary in most precincts, you're going to see 2 columns, and they have labels on them, Republican and Democratic. And also on the SOR itself, we say what to look for on the tapes to help you find exactly which, you make sure the wording is exactly the same as it appears in the tape. If you are in the 8th Congressional District, where there is only a Republican primary, there will only be a Republican column here. The number 7 envelope contains the flash drives with white labels, the trip lock bag seal, and all of the cut zip tie seals from scanners, pull pad cases, cages. State law requires that the back of this envelope be completed with information about your scanners. So we need the opening and closing seal numbers, opening and closing protected count, and opening and closing public count. What we have found over several elections is people weren't filling this out all the time or not filling it out quite correctly. So we've redesigned the envelope so that you can just basically carbon copy, lift the information straight off the machine certification form and plop it right into the back of envelope number 7, as this is showing you with the big red boxes. Just a little note about the machine certification form. The 2 most commonly omitted things here are the trip lock seal number and the cage closing seal. Please make sure that the machine certification form has no blank boxes. If it's got a blank, there's something that still needs to be recorded here. There's somebody in the precinct you should designate as your signature officer, someone who goes around and makes sure that everything has been signed according to this new 1-page guide on what to make sure you get signed. If it's not signed, we're going to call you and any election officer who didn't sign, and you're going to have to come to the office and sign those forms after the fact. We know people have busy lives, and you don't want to be the one having to come in here and take time out of your day to come sign something that should have been signed on election day. The cart is packed, everything is signed, everybody's ready to go home. This is what you should be staging by the door to get loaded into your car. Your black kit, your pull pad cases, your white voted ballots, number 3 boxes, your brown blank box ballots, the number 6. All of these things should be put into your car along with this very important form. that you write down how many boxes of each thing, how many poll pad cases, and you want to sign this form. This is a chain of custody form. You are the custodian of these poll pads, the custodians of these ballots. We want to make sure that we keep track of that. The back side of that form is a windshield sign. It's got your precinct number and name on it. When you drive up to the depot, just hold that up so they can see who you are. That helps them check you in just a little bit faster. And the poll pads, please return them in that banker's box that you pick them up in on Monday, the day before the election. It's just easier to keep track of them all if they stay in that box. And finally, we will go back over to Ravi for final reminders.
Thank you, Jean, for that comprehensive and very useful reminders on closing, so you can get out there at a good time. All right, we're on our home stretch now. We have a couple final updates to share with you from some of our other office staff, including Florence and Sean Stewart. Before we do that, let's get you all sworn in for this election. So please raise your right hand and say along with me. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will perform the duties for this election according to law and the best of my ability, and that I will studiously endeavor to prevent fraud, deceit, and abuse in conducting this election. Congratulations, you've been sworn in for this election. On election day, just make sure to swear in your election officers. Now that you've watched this briefing live, and I see that more than 300 of you are on here with us today, don't forget to go into the election officer portal and take a short quiz. We're going to email you a link for that as soon as it's ready. So look for your email link later this afternoon, and then you can go and complete that quiz as soon as you receive it. And that is due by next Monday, June 10th. So if you're watching a recording of this, perhaps over the weekend, go ahead and just make sure you get that done before or on Monday, June 10th. All right, now it's time to answer your questions. So if you have any questions that have come up from this briefing, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit them. Jean and Susan and Steve are going to triage your questions and direct them to the right staff member to help answer them in the time that we have before, about 12 o'clock today. We have about 30 minutes to answer your questions.
Okay.
Gretchen, next slide, please. And before we start answering your questions, we just want to make sure we get an update on how things are going with early voting and absentee mail voting. So first, Florence, if you wouldn't mind providing us a quick update on early voting. Flo, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Might just need to unmute yourself.
All right, let's try that again. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Chiefs, for serving and Assistant Chiefs. We appreciate you. I have to say it is slow going out there in early voting land in the satellites. To date, we have just under 3,000 voters voting, a little over 3,000 actually. So we're hoping for an uptick in business this coming week. We open 13 more satellites on Saturday, June 8th, and we will be open for 7 days of voting, and we close on Saturday, June 15th. So if you haven't had a chance to come out and vote, please come see us at one of the satellites. We'd love to see you. But it is a little bit slow going, so please tell your friends, neighbors, and family to come out and vote. Back to you, Robbie. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Florence. Sean Stewart, we have two Seans in our office, both spelled the same way, which makes it confusing for us. But Sean Stewart, our Deputy Registrar for absentee mail voting, would you like to provide an update on absentee mail voting?
Hey, Ravi, thanks so much for that opportunity. Not thanks so much for putting me after the awesome Miss Flo and after the very cool Sean, but I guess I'll take the billing I can get. So, Chiefs, how you doing this morning? Hope everybody's doing well. As I like to say, how about those Chiefs? As my colleagues know, I'm a big fan, but I don't have any football to watch right now, so I'm going to have to supplement that excitement with you fine folks. So good to be with you this morning. A couple of reminders going out, but first a quick update on absentee by mail voting. Eric unfortunately let the cat out of the bag at the top. We're not seeing quite the turnout we thought we might, but we do have some envelopes coming back in the building. Right now, we're just over 11,000 voters in the Democratic primary and just under 3,000 in the Republican primary. So we do have a few of those envelopes coming back in the building. We expect to see some more, as we always do, as folks realize that the ballot's sitting there on the kitchen table or sitting there in the junk mail pile on the countertop. We assume we'll get some more of those back in. And then, of course, a good amount dropped off with everybody on Election Day at those drop boxes. A shout out through you to your collector officers. The absentee team's lucky enough to get to look for them on election night. And I hope Ravi won't mind me going off script a little bit to just remind a couple of quick reminders. That's a joke, by the way. He didn't give me a script, so that's all right. Your collector officers, make sure to let them know that they're helping you out right at the end of the day. Make sure they look at that wonderful closing guide that Jean went through, specified all the information they need of what they're putting together with their trip lock bag, their chain of custody forms, and just great reminders, right, that they should be looking for 3 categories of documents and pieces coming back to us here at the Government Center. Those 1A envelopes for provisionals, their purple pouches, and their trip lock absent bags with their absentee ballots. Let them help you, right? Make sure everything's together. Make sure purple drives are in purple pouches and all along the way. They do great work for us, and we thank them for stepping up to make that extra drive back to the Government Center. The team that'll be outside will welcome them as usual. We should have good signage in place. Maybe a little change up that they'll be looking for as we come into the Government Center to try to make the route even more efficient. The staff outside will make sure to interact with them and ensure that they have everything they should have coming back to us. I know Sean Rogers and a couple other folks answered a few questions for us. Just a key reminder, make sure that all the materials come back to us, whether they have anything in them or not. If it's an empty trip lock bag, because you for some reason didn't need Dropbox ballots, make sure the collector brings that. If you only have SDRs and no provisionals, again, bring back all those 1A envelopes and make sure, again, that those pouches are included as well. One final quick reminder on your what ifs. I know we've brought this up before, but number 19, when you have an issued status on your poll pad and a voter presents themselves with that ballot, there's great instructions there in your what if on going through the package and everything they need to do to spoil it and get issued a regular ballot to vote. But just keep in mind that packet that we discuss and that we issue and talk about in that list, that's generally what most voters will have, right? They'll have the whole packet there. They were mailed, but the ballot is the key portion of that. They don't have to have the envelope. They don't have to have the instructions. It's the ballot. That's the key part of that. If they have that to surrender, then you can follow your what if there and get them checked in, let them vote normally. So bottom line is AB folks are working hard. We're excited to work with you in the chances we get to, and we're looking forward to a great election. So Ravi, Gretchen, and team, thank you very much for that opportunity to talk to your chiefs. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean. Now, we're fortunate to be joined by a number of office staff to answer your questions, including our Deputy Director of Elections, Cheryl Jones, our IT Manager, Cord Whitehouse, our Voter Services and Same-Day Registration Manager, Bushra Ardalan, Florence Browner, Deputy Registrar for Early Voting Salaries, and Sean Stewart, Deputy Registrar for Absentee Mail Voting, who just spoke. We have Beth Methvessel, our Clerk to the Electoral Board and our Polling Place Liaison, Sarah Prout, who spoke earlier, she's our Communications Division Chief, and of course, Tyrone Allen, our Voting Equipment and Logistics Manager, and the fan favorite, Kay Garrison, our Election Inventory and Supply Manager. So they're all on deck to answer your questions. Jean, Susan, Steve, what questions do we have?
All right, we've got a whole bunch of them. Some great questions from everyone. A very popular one is for Ravi. Why are we required to use the voter referral worksheet? It seems like it'll just take more time and slow things down.
Thank you for that question. I saw that come in a few times during the presentation. And look, I've been a chief for a long time. I sometimes use the old voter referral worksheet. I sometimes didn't. I get it. This feels like busy work, or it feels onerous. Why are we as an office asking to do this for every single non-routine or provisional voter? Well, the answer is there are too many situations in the last few elections where a provisional voter's vote could not even be considered for being counted because there was a mistake made with the envelope or with the process that led to that voter doing the type of provisional or where they did the provisional. Simply put, the error rate was unacceptable. And we went back and we looked at the process and we said, well, first off, let's start by talking to our chiefs and assistant chiefs and our SDR specialists and see what goes well in the precinct, what doesn't. What are the pain points? What do you feel comfortable doing? What do you not feel comfortable doing? What did this process look like before same-day registration was introduced in November 2022? And some of the foundational principles we kind of observed and heard from chiefs were, well, I'm the chief. I've been doing non-routine voter situations for years, right? If someone has been a chief for 5, 10, 20 years, I know how to use the moving conditions. My SDR specialist still has challenges with this and they don't feel comfortable doing this. And I had an SDR specialist who's great at, but now they're a chief somewhere else. So we said, okay, is there a way that we can divide this process in a way that makes sense? To start with having the chief or assistant chief determine the voter's situation, right? Determine, are they eligible to do a provisional, and are they eligible to do it in this location, which is something chiefs have always done. And then once that determination has been made, which is a piece of the process, then the voter has to sit there at the table, fill out their ballot, fill out their envelope, double check everything's correctly. Can we hand that part of the process off to someone else? And that would be the SDR specialist. And we went through all the changes and the new forms and everything with them during their SDR briefing that we had a few weeks ago. And so fundamentally, that's the process that we're at now. We're trying to have chiefs and assistant chiefs do what they've always done, determine voter eligibility and review non-routine situations, and then have SDR specialists handle the administrative part of the process that just takes time sitting there with the voter. When it comes to the voter referral worksheet in particular, Sean went through this, and there are a lot of different parts on that form, but ultimately you don't actually have to write that much on the form. And of those 4 main sections, A, B, C, and D on the front, as Sean said, you're only doing one of those 4. But what you are writing down in those situations, let's say if it's the voter who's moved, you always had to look up what's the voter's old address, what was the congressional district for that address, what's the voter's new address, what's the congressional district. All we're asking you to do now is to write that down. And then if a mistake occurs and a voter's provisional ballot isn't able to be considered, we can now go back and look at your form and understand, well, what was the process that led to this? So we're trying to attack the problem from every direction. So first is formalizing the process that the best chiefs and assistant chiefs and SDR specialists were already doing. The next part was using that SDR overlay to help catch any omissions on that envelope. And the third part is let's get 2 people's sets of eyes on this. And let's do everything we can to catch issues at the precinct while the voter's still there to allow them to have the best chance of having their vote counted. Because at the end of the day, the eligibility of that ballot should be considered on its merits, not on an error that was made in the process. One of the things that I was really gratified by is even internally, we had staff that were questioning this process and were doubtful. Our trainers did this. They're like, do we really need to do this form? And one of the things that we noticed in training is as we went on and people used the form more, they realized it's not burdensome, it doesn't take a lot of time, and it helps catch those errors and eliminate them in the moment. So what I ask for you to do is give it a chance. See how it goes this election. Provide us your feedback. If you think there's some changes that we need to do, we'll do that. And I hope you've seen over the past number of years that we look and we try to strive for continuous improvement. And if there's something that we can do better, we want to. So I hope that answers the questions we received about why this new process and why the voter referral worksheet is required.
Okay, so I have a question for Kay about supplies. Someone is asking, are we going to get more signs for co-located precincts for this election?
I'm not sure what they're referring to because they get outdoor signs, they get signs with a map that show if it's a dual precinct like that, co-located precinct, they get 4 or 5 signs that come with a map. So it might be good for this individual to call me so I can understand what they're referring to. And I can give them that number right now. It's 703-324-4757.
Kate, does that phone number happen to be in the chief's notebook on 2 different pages in case someone is missing a supply or
Yes,
can't
it
find it?
does. It's in section 310, and that's the one place. And I think it's on another page, as you just mentioned, which is probably 312, I think, but it's right in that section, yes.
But it's on the
312
pages
and
with their supply
310.
checklist, right?
Right. And I do have a couple other things. I don't know if you want me to say them now
Yeah,
or
go ahead.
not. Okay. I know last time we got a lot of comments or people trying to find their admin tablet. And I wanted to let them know that we took that to heart and we have put, I don't know if you can see that, we've put this green label now on each tablet. So it should be easier for them to find. They'll still be in the middle section of the kit, but it has this bright green label on both sides of the tablet. So that should help out. Another thing was the staplers. Well, you should be happy to know you're all getting new staplers this time too. So hopefully that'll take care of that problem. And I wanted to mention, we got a lot of comments from the I always want to call it show and tell. What is, I always forget what we call it. But when they come in
The
next
Chiefs
week,
open house.
open house, that, they didn't know that they had scissors, or they didn't know that they had rubber bands and all these wonderful things. But the chief gets a green pouch, and in that pouch is where all those things are. And it's real important that the chiefs, assistant chiefs, tell the EOs, you do have scissors, you do have rubber bands, you do have staplers, because we get that question all the time. Why didn't I get scissors? Or, whatever the case might be. And the only other thing I wanted to say was that on the orange pouch, remember this time your machine certification will come back in the orange pouch, which is new. So you want to make sure you place it there. And if anybody, that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kay. Susan, do you have another question for us?
Hey, sorry about that. Yeah, Kay, there was another question about the ballot permit cards. They're going to be red, and are they red and blue like they were in the March primary?
They're going to be similar, but you have to remember that since the 8th is different this time, the 8th district will only probably be getting red cards. The others will be red and blue like they were for the 10th and 11th. But they'll be very similar to last time, but you won't get all the colors if you're in the 8th. You only get the red or the pink if you're in the 8th.
Steve?
I've got a question for Bushra. What are the most common reasons that an SDR is rejected?
Bushra, I think you're muted if you're trying to say
Yes.
something right now. Oh, there.
Okay, sorry about that. So the most common reason for SDR to be not accepted was question number 3, that in previous election, the application was filled out wrong. So for that reason, the layover is very helpful for you us to check all the information on the application be completed. That's one of the biggest reasons. The other one was wrong precinct. The voter casted the ballot in wrong precinct. So for that, important for you to check my neighborhood and to see if the voter is in your precinct or not. Those are the most common issue that we faced in last election.
Bushra, I have a question for you.
Yes.
How are you going to feel if you still get any provisional envelopes, any SDR envelopes that are filled out incorrectly or missing something? What would be your message to chiefs in advance of election day so that that doesn't happen?
So just tell you a bad news. We already received one from early voting. But the good news, early voting, they can go back and vote and cast another provisional SDR. So we denied that SDR because the wrong box in question number 3 was checked. We denied the application and denied the SDR, but we contacted the voter. He went back and voted this time. He filled out the correct and answered the correct question and checked the correct no. But the bad news is for election, we don't have curing. If the application was completed in correctly and was missing information, that SDR will be denied. So especially question 3, please double check question number 3 that the correct no that is in the right side of the envelope has been checked, not the one in the middle. I think the layover will be help on that. Other information is very important too, like other required like signature or yes to the question, yes, I'm citizen or not. So hopefully you will not see question number 3 again filled out incorrectly.
Great, thank you, Bushra.
Bushra, I've got actually another question for you. What should we do if the voter fills out the wrong side of the green envelope?
So if the voter is still there, please give them another envelope to fill out. We don't want the chief or SDR specialist go and fill out the other side. This situation happened in one election, so we don't want that to repeat. So if the voter is still there, give them another envelope, fill it out, and the other one will be voted. voided the other envelope that was completed in the wrong side. There is one situation, and I don't want to confuse you. We are accepting that if the voter already registered in Virginia, only information that needed is to change their address, we will accept that SDR, even the other side. But please let them just fill out all the SDR side. Okay.
So Bushra, I just want to make sure I've understood that correctly. So two things. One, if the voter fills out the wrong side, have them fill out a new envelope and take the voided one, the one that was filled out incorrectly, mark it void and return an envelope number 8.
Yes.
And 2, if they're not sure which side of the envelope to complete the same day registration side.
Definitely, yes.
Okay.
All the time. If they are SDR voter, not the provisional.
Cheryl, I've got some questions for you. First, can a registered Republican vote in the Democratic primary?
We don't register by party in Virginia, so there are no registered Republicans or independents or Democrats. Anyone may vote in either primary. And if they voted in, they can vote in a different primary than they voted in the past. Say they always voted, or last time they voted in a Republican primary, they can vote in the Democratic primary this time, and they can vote Republican next time. It doesn't matter. We're an open primary state.
And where should we put any explanations about provisionals? Are they clipped to the envelope?
Yeah, first put the explanations in your admin tablet in the digital log, because that's what we see when we're researching those ballots or researching the voters. We look there for notes because that's a permanent record that will always be in our database. So write it there. Sometimes the voters want to write a little story for us, and just give them a piece of paper and you can just attach it to the outside of the envelope. Remember, we don't open those provisional envelopes unless the ballot is being accepted, and we don't know that until after the research is done and the electoral board has voted on it. So if you've got something inside that ballot that is going to justify why that ballot should be accepted, we're not going to see it. And if that envelope isn't accepted because we didn't hear the story, whatever the reason is, we'll never know. We'll never open that ballot. So the ballots are, just remember, those envelopes aren't open until the very last thing. They're opening those ballots, the envelopes are open, the ballots are taken out, and they're immediately put into a digital scanner. So clip it to the outside. It's okay if it falls off, because we empty out those 1A envelopes and we'll find the note in there and we can attach it. Just be sure that the voter's name is on the note. You can staple it, but be careful not to also staple the ballot. We don't want the ballot stapled inside the envelope because it may not go through the digital scanner well. Just makes more problems.
One more for you, Cheryl. What do we do if a voter insists that their ballot be hand counted?
The law does not give voters permission to decide how their ballot is going to be counted. The law says that the digital ballots will be placed into the voting machine. So that's what you need to tell the voter. And if there's a problem, if they destroy the ballot or whatever, you give them another ballot. If it becomes more of a problem, call the office. You know, we'll help you through it or talk to the voter or something. But they don't have a choice. It needs to go through the voting machine. And it's against the law to destroy a ballot, knowingly destroy a ballot. So that's something that you can tell the voters as well.
So Tyrone, we have a question for you. When can we expect the cages to get delivered to the voting locations?
Good morning. Thank you. I certainly appreciate being here with everyone today and for all of your service and hard work. The cages are in delivery mode now. All of the early voting sites have been delivered. The specials these are non-school sites, are being delivered as we speak. Those deliveries have started this week, and all the schools, Fairfax County Public Schools, will be delivered next week. Every precinct site should have their equipment by Thursday the 13th. And we're asking the chiefs and assistant chiefs as they visit their sites after the 13th to check the equipment to make sure that it is the correct equipment for their precinct. But there should not be an issue. Thank you.
Great. So, Ravi, should the chiefs and assistant chiefs set up all the poll pads and all the DS200s, or can they leave some aside?
Great question. So let's take those two things separately. For the DS200s, our policy for a number of years now is you open and set up both DS200s. And then it's your choice whether you want to direct voters to use one or both. So you could set up both, have one for voters to use, and turn the other one around. But the reason that's so important is you want to make sure both machines are ready to be used as soon as a voter needs them. And so if one machine malfunctions for any reason temporarily, voters can immediately cast their ballot on the other machine. They're not waiting for you to set it up at that moment. It also simplifies how you return tapes and how you prepare and organize for that. For the poll pads, we strongly encourage you to open and set up all of your poll pads as well, because you want to ensure that the poll pads, as you check in voters, are all syncing with each other. If you only open 2 poll pads now and you wait to open your other 2 later, it will take them time, if you have to open them and use them, for them to receive the updates from the first 2 poll pads. Cord, is there anything else you'd like to share about just kind of the poll pads and the process for the selection related to the poll pads?
Thanks, Ravi. Nothing in particular. The poll pad process is going to be similar to what you guys remember from March. It's going to work in the same capacity. We're going to be continuing to do what's called guided access mode, where you only have access to the poll pad app. It's going to open in poll pad access, and it's going to stay in the poll pad app. You're not going to be able to get out and go to settings or any of the other applications. So anybody that's worked in March is going to be the same procedures this time.
Great, thank you.
As a follow-up to that, there were connectivity issues in some locations last time. Has anything been done about that?
Yes, so probably referring to the admin tablets. Those have a connection, up to the internet to submit the different forms that we have. And there's some locations where the cellular connection built into the admin tablet just is not great. What we did in March is we ran a trial on the Wi-Fi that the schools have, and we tested about 14 different locations on their new Wi-Fi system, and we had great success. So we've extended the program this time. So any precinct that is at a school, their admin tablet is automatically going to connect to the Wi-Fi if it is available, depending on where you're at the school. There still may be certain locations at a school where you're not near where one of their Wi-Fi access points are. And at that point, the admin tablet would default back to trying to use its cellular connection. But if it can pick up the Wi-Fi at a school, then it's going to do that. There's nothing you have to do on your end. That's going to be the default connection for it. And hopefully that should help a lot of the admin tablets have a stronger connection.
Steve?
Beth, have you made it crystal clear to FCPS that Monday, June 17th is written in stone for pre-election day setup?
Okay, can you all hear me? I can't get my video to go. Oops.
We can hear you, Beth.
Okay, good.
And we can see you.
Okay, great. Yes, I have. The short answer is yes. And if there are any issues regarding setup at schools between the 4:30 and 7:30 time, please let me know as soon as possible. I do want to point out, though, please do not start setup late, so late that you run over 7:30. 7:30, the schools are, you have to be out of the school. So anyway, like I said, please, any issues with that, please call me.
Beth, what a good rule of thumb be that you should start your setup no later than 6:30?
6:30 is the very latest. I would really shoot for 6. That gives you time to iron out any little bumps.
And if any of you have private polling places that are not allowing you to do setup until significantly later than that, please let Beth or myself know, and we can see if we can coordinate with that facility. Thank you, Beth.
Sorry, we've had a few questions for Sarah about media. Will media have credentials? How do you know if somebody's a legitimate media? And just kind of generally, if they're going to be common or if that's unusual to have media in the precincts.
Yeah, so I will say that our office doesn't determine who is professional media versus who is not. We definitely err on the side of everyone should have access. We want to invite people into the polling place to see, the transparent process, how we're doing things. We want to grant access. So as long as they're not being disruptive or hindering voting, then we err on the side of letting them in. Sorry, what was the second part of that question?
The second part was how likely is it that there are going to be media in the precincts?
How likely? So in March, we had quite a bit of activity around this time, a lot of requests for interviews, a lot of pre-planning. I'll say right now, it's been pretty quiet. If we have media outlets who request to come to your polling precinct, we will be in communication with you in advance. But as of this time, it's seeming pretty quiet. However, because of Virginia code, they do have access to any polling place location. So anyone can come unannounced. So people can decide, day of, wake up that morning, I'm going to my local polling place and I am media and, here are my credentials. You can ask for credentials. However, if somebody doesn't have credentials, we're going to treat them in the same manner of they need to be following the media guidelines. And if they are, that's great. If they're not, that's when we want to escalate. And that's when you should call me or Shweta on election day.
Sean Rogers, what should we do if a voter requests to change their party to vote?
Sure. So this would be in the 10th or 11th congressional district where we have a dual party primary. If a voter checks in to vote for one party's primary and realizes before they cast their ballot that that is not the ballot that they want to vote today, it depends on at what point that process and at what point that occurs. If it's before they get checked in, we can start over, and you're good to go. But if they have already been checked in, they're given their ballot, but they haven't yet cast it, there is a page in your notebook on the problem solving section for how to do this. Essentially, you'll cancel their check-in and then start back over and check them back in for the other party's primary. A voter can vote in any party's primary. They just only get to vote in one of the two when there's two being held on the same day.
And Sean, another question. The new referral form is confusing. The first section A has poll pad shows unmarked. What does that mean?
Sure. So there's several different ways that a voter could have an absentee status on a poll pad. I might ask Sean Stewart if he wants to jump in for all the different ways a ballot could be listed as unmarked, but that's essentially that it has been returned unvoted to the office. Is that correct, Sean? What are the situations where that would be? Sean Stewart, I guess I should say.
You didn't want to refer to yourself there, Sean? Yeah, no, absolutely. Great question, right? So unmarked means we've received it back at the office, hasn't been voted. So that could be simply that somebody has gotten it back to us, didn't want to vote the ballot. It was returned undeliverable by USPS. Could also mean that there was an issue with the voter statement and that we've reached out to the voter to try to correct that issue. But statute also allows them the opportunity to cast a ballot in person to correct that, hence the unmarked status. So you can feel comfortable in that. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean and Sean. Susan and Steve, do we have another question?
So we're getting a few questions about supplies and equipment. What should chiefs do if they need more extension cords, if they need things to cover the extension cords? What if there's something missing on the cart? How do they know what should be on the cart? So I would think
that could be a Tyrone question.
That could go to Tyrone, yeah.
Thank you. If there are additional supplies beyond what is considered generic to the cart, they need to contact their rover. And their rover can communicate that back, and we can get them the additional supplies that they need, whether it be extension cords or additional signage. Each cage is supplied with a generic amount of these items, but there are special situations and circumstance where a precinct might need more than they are initially assigned. Just communicate that back to the rover. The rover will communicate that back to warehouse. We'll get the additional supplies and they can be delivered to you. And we'll make a note for future reference also that those supplies in additions can be supplied to your cage at the next time it is deployed.
Okay, so Ravi, we have a few questions for you. Let's start with what is the reasoning behind setting up a ballot table?
That's an interesting question, and I'll tell you why. Back when I first started as a chief, I didn't set up a ballot table. And when I started working in our office, I learned that this is something that's a best practice that helps and stuff. And I said, it worked just fine for me when I was in my precinct. And then I realized, well, hold on, all those times where it felt like I didn't have an extra officer to fill in for a station because someone else was on break, or that there was a backup in the line, it's because I didn't have a separate ballot table. So for all precincts, you should use a separate ballot table. That way you have one officer at each check-in station, at each poll pad. They're checking the voter, handing them a voter permit card. That voter then takes that voter permit card over to the ballot table and they exchange it for a ballot there. And that way the officer at the ballot table can provide a little bit more detailed instructions on how to mark that ballot, where to sit to mark that ballot, help the voter spoil and replace the ballot if needed, essentially handle everything related to that process. So in short, yes, it is required to have a ballot table, and every precinct should have one.
And following up with precinct management, does your SDR specialist sit at the SDR table the whole time? Can they help with other stations as well? How should that be handled?
That's a great question. One I saw come in from a number of folks about, does my SDR specialist have to only do that all day? So a few pieces to this. So for one, in this election, we've essentially assigned an extra officer to every precinct to serve as the SDR specialist. We have assigned more officers than we typically would, one more officer to every precinct, to help with that SDR process. We want to make sure that all of you as chiefs and assistant chiefs aren't being burdened with that, but also to get that practice and to be ready for the November presidential election. That said, we of course understand in a primary election, significantly fewer voters show up. They're usually voters who know what they're doing. There might be fewer SDR or provisional situations. And so if you're in a smaller precinct and you don't have a lot of SDR situations arising, sure, the officer assigned as the SDR specialist can help with other stations. What I would suggest is have that individual help check in voters at the check-in table. So maybe you have 3 check-in lines going. And then if an SDR provisional situation arises, okay, not a big deal. You just close one of those lines and have that person help the SDR voter. But if you have them helping another station, let's say they're the person at the DS200, then pulling them away from that station is a little bit harder because then you have to immediately find someone to swap in. But in short, sure, if you don't have that many SDRs, the SDR specialist can help with other tasks if truly needed. In the November presidential election, we expect to assign 2 SDR specialists to every precinct, and we expect them to be very busy with all the different situations that would arise in a presidential election.
And one last quick question. What do you do with the unused ballots that are in the cage? Do those get returned? Do you have to take them out, put them in the white box? How does that work with the new white box?
Sure. So as Jean mentioned during the closing the poll section, we're now using different boxes for sending out blank ballots to you and collecting and returning those back, and different boxes for the voted ballots. So if you have any unused ballots, if I've understood the question correctly, you have unused ballots left in your cage or in one of the brown cardboard boxes they're shipped in, it's not a big deal. Seal it back up, throw a label for a number 6 box on there and return it to our office. If you have voted ballots, those of course will come back in the white cardboard boxes. So that's the most important thing that we want to keep separate. Voted ballots come back in white boxes, blank ballots come back in brown cardboard boxes.
Sean, one for you. How should we deal with spouses or parents essentially voting for mentally challenged individuals?
Sure. So that's an interesting question. The answer to that is essentially the request for assistance form. We don't qualify why someone needs assistance. If they need assistance in marking or voting their ballot for, let's say, a dexterity issue or something else, if they are a qualified voter in the precinct, they are entitled to receive assistance from someone else. So you would use the request for assistance form and make sure that the assistant is filling out the required sections of that form, and proceed as you would for any other voter. Again, we're not questioning their reason for needing someone to give them some assistance in marking that ballot. So thank you.
And Sean, I just want to add to that.
Robbie?
Yeah, no, this is a challenging situation that can sometimes arise. And so we want to make clear that it is the voter's right and choice whether to involve an assistant in the process. So I know there have been questions sometimes about individuals who may individuals who come in with someone else and the person accompanying them is directing the process. So we want to be very clear. It's always the voter who directs the process. The voter decides, which party's primary they're going to check in for, how they're going to mark their ballot, which candidates they choose to vote for, and if they so choose to have an assistant help them in that process, specifically in reading, marking, or translating the ballot.
And I'll just add one last thing to point out to that, just as a point of courtesy. We wouldn't assume that anybody needs assistance when they come into the precinct. They'll be the ones to make that determination.
And Sean, does each team have an SDR expert?
Each precinct does have an SDR specialist for the selection, as Robbie mentioned, essentially one more election officer in the precinct. And I'll give a quick preview. We'll have more in November, but for now, yes, minimum one SDR specialist per precinct.
All right.
Sean,
sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Sean, where do we find the reason codes on the voter referral worksheet?
Oh, sure. So that's a great question. So the reason codes are referring to any provisional ballot. There are different reason codes. SDR is provisional reason code number 1, but it's also its entire own side. And then there's several other ones, and they're in multiple places. You can find them on the voter referral worksheet. Once you've arrived at that decision, let's say the voter is entitled to vote a provisional ballot using reason code number 5, flip to the backside. That same reason code is described in your what ifs, but really where you find it is on the provisional ballot envelope itself in the bottom left corner, where the SDR specialist is checking off the reason that the voter is voting provisionally. It's right there. So number 4, for instance, is they don't have their ballot to surrender. Number 5 is they're marked as having already voted. It's just checked off on the envelope itself.
And I've got one for Robbie, then I'll turn him over to Susan. Robbie, someone says they're hoping there won't be any collector officers for this election because having 2 officers leave just after the close leaves more work for the officers still in the precinct.
That doesn't sound like a question. That just sounds like they really want their collector officers to stick around. We hear it, we get it, right? Closing is challenging in a primary election when you have fewer officers, especially when you lose 2 officers for that closing process. That said, it's really important that we meet our legal requirements. And one of our legal requirements is reporting results on election night. And we need those collector officers to bring back those thumb drives that have your election returns on them in a timely manner. That's what also replaces the process, for those of you who've been around for a while, of phoning in your results. And sometimes in some elections, it used to take a long time. You'd be on hold for a while, or it would take a long time to read the numbers off, and then we'd have to double check them with you. So this new process where your collector officers bring them back allows that process to be sped up. So we understand it can be challenging, but we hope the improvements we've made to the guides and the instructions of the Chief's Notebook for closing will help. So we appreciate the concern, but we're doing our best to address it in other ways. And of course, in the presidential election, you'll have more than enough officers for everything you need to do. We have time for maybe just a couple final questions, and then let's wrap up here. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. And of course, for everyone, if you've already received the email with the link to your Chiefs briefing quiz, you're welcome to go ahead and complete it. So Jean, Susan, Steve, do we have just a couple final questions?
So a couple quick questions for Gretchen to finish up. When should assistant chiefs expect to hear from their chiefs?
Thanks, Susan. Great question. So assistant chiefs should be hearing from their chief anytime over the next couple of days and by Monday at the latest. So if on Monday you still haven't heard from your chief, give us a call and we'll reach out to the chief and make sure you guys get in contact.
And when can we get our chief's notebooks?
Great question. So I'll say a couple things. The Chief's Notebook is available online for anyone to take a look at it. If you go to the portal, we sent out the link to you all as well. But if you go to the portal, the Chief's Notebook, the digital copy is available online right there. If you are interested in getting the paper copy of your notebook ahead of time, you can come to our Chiefs Open House, which is open to all chiefs, assistant chiefs, reserve chiefs, and reserve assistant chiefs. You're welcome to come by. And you can pick up the paper copy of your Chief's Notebook then. Otherwise, you'll get the paper copy of your notebook on the Monday before Election Day when you pick up the rest of your supplies. The one caveat to that is if you are a chief or an assistant chief who is also working at the early voting satellites, we wanted to make things easier for you, and we're going to drop off a copy of your notebook on Monday to your satellite location. So if you fall into that category, you pick up your notebook from the satellite, and you don't have to come out for the Chief's Open House. Although I will say you are still welcome to come out if you want that additional practice and support from the open house, but you don't need to pick up your notebook there. But again, for everyone else, either come to the open house next Tuesday or pick up your notebook when you pick up the rest of your supplies on the day before the election.
And a quick final question. What do I do if I'm over my head and I can't figure out what's happening? Who do I call?
Call us, please. We are here to support you. We want to make sure you don't feel overwhelmed, and we can do everything we can to make you feel confident and ready for Election Day. We're happy to walk through any kind of question you have, whether it's from, I don't know where to find something in the Chief's notebook, or I just not even sure where to get started, or if you have procedural questions of something isn't clear in the notebook and you want a little bit of extra help. We are here to help you through any of that. So please give us a call at any point between now through Election Day, and we are more than happy to support you.
See, Gretchen, when you got that question, who are you going to call? I thought I knew the answer to that. I saw Sean Stewart's face. He was going to say what I was going to say. Ghostbusters. Sean, I know you had something you wanted to share with all of our chiefs and assistant chiefs.
Well, apparently it was not the Ghostbusters, Robbie, since you just knocked that out. No, chiefs and your officers. Hey, just a quick reminder. What's another important thing you should do on Election Day? That's vote. For those of you especially not serving in your home precinct, please remember you have two opportunities to vote ahead of time. You can visit Flo and her wonderful team at the early voting locations through next Saturday. You can also vote absentee by mail. But if you want to take that opportunity, you got to make sure to apply. Those applications are due to our office online, in person, or by mail. Don't mail it by 5 o'clock tomorrow. That is the absentee application deadline. So if you're not in your home precinct, you need to vote. Make sure you do what you need to do to make that happen. Thanks, Ravi.
Thank you very much, Sean. You know, it takes a village to do everything we do in the office of elections, and the group of people you've heard from today are just a very small subset of that very large village. But that village also includes all of you as chiefs and assistant chiefs. You're part of our community, and we can't wait to have your help and support on Election Day in conducting a successful, fair, and free election to allow all the voters of Fairfax County to be able to cast their vote on Election Day. As Eric said at the very beginning of this briefing, this is our preview for what's going to be a very busy presidential year for us as office staff. You know, we don't get much time off after this election. We go right into the November election mode. And so we encourage all of you to take this opportunity to review all of our procedures, review the updated forms and documents and guides in the Chief's notebook, really get ready for June, but really that means getting ready for November. We don't expect to make much, if any, changes in our procedures between June and November because we want things to stay the same as much as possible. So that way you know exactly what you did in June is what you'll be doing in November. But that also said, I don't want to get too far ahead. Right now, what we've got coming up in a week and a half is our June 18th Democratic and Republican presidential primary elections. We know sometimes having a dual party primary can be challenging and confusing. As Gretchen said, give us a call. We're very happy to help you both before Election Day and on Election Day. We hope the information we've provided to you in this briefing today was helpful and informative and insightful. We hope we've answered all of your questions. And if we haven't, give us a call or send us an email. And we're more than happy to answer those questions for you. On behalf of all of my colleagues within our election administration division, within our office as a whole, and all of our staff out in the field, thank you so much. Again, contact us if you have any questions, but otherwise, we look forward to seeing all of you next Tuesday for the Chief Open House, and then on Election Day, having a great election. Thank you very much, and have a great election.